Today's video is brought to you by NordVPN. More about them in just a bit. Have you ever wished you could be someone else? It's not an uncommon thought. We're often envious of some part of another's life. Money, fame, freedom, all sorts of things. Or maybe it's less what someone else has and just wanting to get away from something that you have to endure. No matter the reason, it's usually just a flight to fancy for most of us. But most of us isn't all of us, as these 10 people prove. Number 10. Darius McCollum can't stop impersonating transit employees. Darius McCollum is a man who loves trains and buses. The New York resident has Asperger's syndrome and a lifelong love of vehicles that help move people around the city. So much so that he's been arrested a staggering 32 times for pretending to be a transit employee and making off with those vehicles. When he was just a kid avoiding bullies on the trains, he became friends with a subway driver who actually told him how to drive the trains. He had the whole subway memorized by the time he was 8. During his life, McCollum has essentially stolen hundreds of trains and buses, but he doesn't joyride. He just works. He follows the routes and makes all the scheduled stops. None of the passengers have ever missed out on where they needed to go. As a result of his arrests, he's also spent a third of his life behind bars. But every time he gets out, he goes right back to it. The result is that he's become a kind of local celebrity, and there's even a documentary film about him. No matter how many times he gets arrested, he's unable to resist the urge to go back. Number 9. A psychiatrist impersonated a butcher to treat a patient. Ibn Sina was a philosopher, an astronomer, and a doctor about 1,000 years ago. As part of his work, he was also one of the fathers of psychiatry. He didn't just treat patients physically, he understood there was psychology at play in certain ailments, and rather than just dismissing this out of hand, he tried to play along with his patients to see if he could meet them on their terms in an effort to help solve their problems. In one famous case, he was treating a Persian prince who was said to be afflicted by a serious case of malnourishment. The reason being was that he was under the delusion that he was a cow. He allegedly mooed like a cow and begged to be turned into a stew. Ibn Sina treated the man by pretending to be a butcher. He approached the cow prince with a knife and then told the prince that he could not slaughter him. The cow was too lean and unfit for butchery, so in order to be fit for slaughter, he needed to eat and gain weight. The prince complied and he began to eat. Gradually feeling better, he soon left the delusion behind. Number 8. A scammer called fast food restaurants pretending to be a cop to torture employees. Sometimes impersonating an individual can be easier than you'd think, and the results can also be far more dangerous and shocking. That was the case in 2004 when a scammer began calling fast food restaurants. The man was impersonating a police officer and convinced an 18-year-old employee of McDonald's to be strip searched while he was on the phone. For over 3 hours, the scammer tortured and humiliated the employee, all at the hands of her manager, who testified later that she truly believed it was a police officer telling her what to do. This included making the girl do jumping jacks and the manager calling her own fiancé to come and spank the girl for 10 minutes. Things got even worse from there. The employee ended up suing McDonald's and winning $6.1 million thanks to the fact that they knew a scammer was making calls without warning employees about it. The man was eventually arrested, but not convicted. The calls did stop after his arrest, though. Number 7. The Indian government hired people to imitate monkeys. When a person impersonates someone else, you can typically take it for granted that the someone is actually a person. We only use that term to mean humans, typically. So let's say this is the story about people impersonating something else. In this case, it's monkeys. But not for fun, it was a real job. The Indian government hired 40 people to impersonate monkeys. Aside from being hilarious, it did have a purpose. The macaques in and around India's Parliament building are a serious nuisance. They don't just attack people, they roam the halls of Parliament and steal, intimidate, and are otherwise just not pleasant to be around. And no one wants to kill the monkeys, especially since the monkey god Hanuman is well revered by the Hindu people. But no one wants to be subjected to monkey attacks either, so the solution is to out-monkey the monkeys by scaring them off with fake monkeys. Before the fake monkey plan, they used real monkeys of a different species, the langur, but that rubbed people the wrong way as well. Imprisoning one kind of monkey to scare off another monkey wasn't a win for animal rights activists, as you can imagine. The monkey impersonators are able to reproduce the sounds of langurs to scare off the macaques. Number 6. The Ku Klux Klan used to impersonate Mr. Rogers. Most of us would probably never associate Mr. Rogers, that paragon of wholesome entertainment and children's enrichment, with the Ku Klux Klan, and truth be known, he didn't want to be associated with them either. But that didn't stop the Klan from impersonating Rogers to the point where the law had to get involved. The story only dates back to 1990, when Fred Rogers sued and courts were forced to order the Missouri Knights of the Ku Klux Klan to stop making messages designed to mimic the music from Mr. Rogers' Rogers' neighborhood, as well as his speech patterns. The recordings feature someone who sounds like Rogers using racial slurs and even mimic a lynching. The second version focuses on hateful comments towards homosexuals. The recordings would be played when a certain number was called, and that number had been distributed to schoolchildren.
So, it's a familiar situation. You're at the coffee shop, the airport, wherever, and there's that free Wi-Fi network that has those 5 strong bars of Wi-Fi reception, but should you click on it, it could be a trap. Could someone be there looking to intercept your data and get into your personal information, your bank accounts, etc.? Well, I'll tell you what, you can use that Wi-Fi totally safely if you have the precaution of having NordVPN installed on your PC, your Mac, your phone, whatever. Just fire up Nord, hit connect to that Wi-Fi, and do whatever you want online because no one is breaking through Nord's incredible encryption, keeping other people's eyes off your browsing. Now that's all good, but it's only really applicable when you're out and about. The best thing for me about a VPN is more streaming options. Close Netflix, fire up Nord, select another place, and boom, a whole new Netflix homepage with a whole bunch of new shows. It also works for a bunch of other streaming options as well. Nice. Also, if you shop online, you'll often find that there are things that are only available in some regions. Nord can also solve that problem. So look, get the safety, get the cool extra stuff, streaming games, etc. Just go to nordvpn.com/TopTenz to get a 2-year plan plus 4 months free with a huge discount. And now back to today's video. Number 5. A German shoemaker faked being an officer to commit a robbery. In 1906, the pieces were slowly being put into place for World War I, and even back then, the German army was known for having a blind obedience to authority. We know this because German shoemaker Wilhelm Voigt exploited it for his own personal gain. Voigt, a man who had already something of an unsavory criminal history, found himself a Prussian captain's uniform that he had assembled with second-hand bits and pieces, and found 2 squads of soldiers who were just coming off duty. He ordered the men to follow him into town to arrest the mayor and other officials before taking the town's supply of cash away in 2 sacks like an old-timey cartoon villain. He then had the soldiers accompany the mayor and others to the police station where he vanished with the money. The police, naturally, had no idea what was going on. Voigt got 4,000 marks out of the scheme but was caught a few days later. He was sentenced to 4 years, but apparently Kaiser Wilhelm actually thought it was funny and had the sentence cut down to less than 2. Number 4. A kid in the UK impersonated an MI5 agent to plot his own murder. This one is the inception of impersonation weirdness and takes a bit to fully understand. Here's the short version. A 14-year-old boy went online and pretended to be a British spy named Janet. Under the guise of Janet, he tried to recruit a 16-year-old friend into the British Secret Service, but in order to prove himself, he needed to kill the 14-year-old. Sound baffling? Well, it was. John, the 14-year-old, convinced Mark, the other boy, that it'd make £80 million meet the Prime Minister and, of course, get to have sex with Janet, the 44-year-old married spy. All he had to do was stab John to death, which he tried to do. John was stabbed twice, but survived. Mark was the one who called for help after doing it. During the course of the investigation, John became the first person ever in British history to be charged with inciting their own murder. Number 3. Howie Mandel was kicked out of school for impersonating a school board member. Howie Mandel has been working as a comedian since the 1980s and has managed to stay in the public eye with his work in reality shows like Deal or No Deal and America's Got Talent, as well as his voice work in things like Bobby's World and Gremlins. And who would have guessed that he was a rabble-rouser in his school days who actually got kicked out of school for impersonating school officials? Mandel attended a high school in Toronto, where he took it upon himself to impersonate a school board member towards the end of arranging a construction project to build an addition to the school. In one interview, he explained this further by saying he'd hired the contracting firm to expand the library. This was just one of 3 times that he was kicked out of different schools. Number 2. A woman impersonated the prosecutor to drop charges against herself. Bar Simpson and Shaggy taught us that I didn't do it and it wasn't me are reasonable responses to getting caught red-handed. But neither one is very successful in the face of real-world evidence. If you want to get away with a bad act, you need someone else to agree you didn't do it. Someone like the local prosecutor. This was Lisa Landon's thinking when she was charged with drug possession and stalking. She needed the prosecutor to drop those charges. The prosecutor was probably unsympathetic to Landon's plight, so Landon went with Plan B and impersonated the prosecutor, filing her own paperwork to dismiss the charges. The scheme didn't work, and she managed to rack up 7 additional charges as a result, including false personation and evidence tampering. Her plan failed when a forensic examiner scheduled to interview Landon to determine her competency called the prosecutor to ask if the interview should still happen since the charges had been dropped. If not for that, well, who knows if it would have worked. Number 1. William James Clark impersonates the military constantly.
If you're not from Oklahoma, you may have never heard of William James Clark, but if you are, chances are you've seen him on the news once or twice in the past. Clark can't stop impersonating military personnel, and he has a penchant for doing it in the biggest, most noticeable ways he can. It's not just that Clark wears a uniform, Clark keeps getting involved in things that he shouldn't. So let's start in 2002, when a bridge on I-40 collapsed, killing 14 people and injuring many others. William James Clark showed up in uniform and claimed to be with the army. He took over the relief effort and even gave media interviews. Clark has never been in the military. He took medical records from at least one of the victims as well. He was charged with impersonating an officer and possession of a firearm. After 70 months in prison, Clark resurfaced in 2007 when he called the Russian embassy and told them he was part of a covert military operation to assassinate Vladimir Putin. He later told police he'd overheard employees at the local bingo hall discussing Putin's assassination plot and thought it was real. He also conceded he suffers from mental illness and sometimes has hallucinations. In 2010, he was caught again in uniform, this time in Alaska. In addition to pretending to be military, he had been committing tens of thousands in check fraud across the country as well.